Blog Talk Radio.
And welcome to another edition of Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. And we have a reoccurring guest, for good reason, Keith Reynolds, focusing on, the business and social and our social situation, societal, in the United States. Mr. Reynolds, welcome to Carnivore Radio.
Thanks, guys. Good to be here.
Once again. Excellent. We're glad you're here. So we do have an agenda, and I think it's very timely. The first thing we'd like to discuss is, and something you're very close to, is the skills needed in today's workforce. Because it's funny, at first it was like, the skills needed in the 21st, that's dated. I mean, things have changed in the last year, haven't they, Mr. Reynolds?
Well, they certainly have. With everybody working from home, it's put a premium on being able to work digitally.
So that's an interesting point. There was always a skills divide. Has that increased, do you think, in the last year? Like, if you don't have digital skills, you're really behind the eight ball, aren't you?
Yeah, and there's a huge need and demand for people who have skills. You got to, in the one hand, you have unusually high unemployment because of the pandemic, and at the same time, from restaurant jobs to online marketing jobs, there's demand for workers that can't be filled.
That's interesting, and we'll throw it out to Dr. Lopkin. I think that's really interesting what Keith just brought up. It's interesting to me because, there's certain areas where good luck getting a job, but as Mr. Reynolds was just saying, that there's some areas that jobs are going begging. And I think you're big on that, Dr. Lopkin, in terms of even things like, STEM jobs, technology jobs. Comment on that. And I know we've talked about it before, but I'm fascinated by that because I used to be enamored with the power of a college degree, and I love what you say about that could be changing too. A lot to digest, but do your best.
Yeah, in terms of STEM jobs, I mean, this has been a shortage for quite a while, even way before COVID. And the shortage was essentially created by this myth that everybody needed a college education, and people went in for the liberal arts education and English majors, and those weren't where jobs were. So you had fewer and fewer people going in.
I'm sorry, I just want to interject one thing. I think that even goes to some business degrees. I mean, what the world doesn't need is another manager.
Yeah, most business degrees are absolutely useless. In fact, I have worked with MBAs, and the first thing I have had to do is get them to unlearn everything they learned in their degree. Because it's one of those things, we've used the term before. In theory and practice are the same. In practice, they aren't. But
actually, I experienced that firsthand, Dr. Lopkin, when I was in the business world. We had some they were part of the Bain Group, and they were all from, Ivy League schools, and it was almost comical. They were like, all theory, these great theoretical, concepts, but, in the real world, it'd be a disaster.
Yeah, I mean, for a business degree, the perfect example is if you've seen the movie Back to School, and Rodney Dangerfield plays a businessman who decides to go to college to spend more time with his son. And there's this one scene where he's taking Intro to Business, and the professor is giving all of these highfalutin theories, and he's sitting there laughing, going, that's never going to work. And he's talking about how it works in the real world as opposed to the theory, and the professor doesn't want to hear it. But in terms of STEM jobs, there were a lot of people that just went, well, I need a college degree, but science is too hard. I'm going to take easier classes so I can get through this more. And we ended up with a generation of people that don't have STEM skills. And now most of the major tech firms are looking at people and saying, you know what, we don't care if you have a degree. You can have a high school diploma. If you go out and get technical professional certifications, that's what we need, because that shows you can do the job we need you to do.
There's no
interesting,
question
Mr.
about that.
Keith, what do you say on that? Go ahead.
No question about that. And beyond the STEM jobs that everyone talks about, there's digital workers needed to do customer service, to do website posting, to do marketing jobs. And the workers of the future are going to be low code, no code jobs, but they still have to understand how to use platforms, and those platforms like Salesforce.com or HubSpot, those kinds of companies, Google, are putting out certification programs for workers to take. And I'm actually involved in a program in Stamford, Connecticut, called Tech Forward, where we are providing a navigator's course to give people certifications, to help them select the right certifications for themselves and to get those certifications. And we're launching in a couple weeks a pilot program.
Keith, that's very interesting. We'll have to have you on the our Carnivore Bites edition on that. But on that whole subject, you talk about certifications, and Dr. Lopkin talking about the highfalutin liberal arts degrees kind of going by the wayside. Isn't maybe certification, is that maybe the way of the future? Not, you don't need 4 years. Get a 6-month certification in, I don't know, whatever it is, some STEM or technological related discipline. Is that not correct?
But it's definitely going in that direction. But in terms of programming especially, I would estimate that 90% of the programmers that I know didn't learn programming in school. They did it on their own. They learned it online courses. So they're not even looking at the standard educational system to get those skills. And programming on its most basic level, this is going to become the blue-collar job of the future. Because as chains like McDonald's started putting in kiosks, and restaurants and supermarkets are putting in self-serve kiosks, somebody has to fix these and recode them when they break. And that's going to be the blue-collar job of the future, and it needs programming skills.
Yep.
Interesting, Keith. I like what Dr. Lopkin was saying, and comment on that, because I think, for job security is obviously, going out the window, but if you have relevant skills, I mean, at least for the short term, don't you kind of have a quasi job security? I mean, fixing the kiosks, a manager of some company, you could be out the door because your boss doesn't like the way you part your hair.
Aiden, I'm looking at some of the notes we used in putting the program together, and 8 and 10 middle skill jobs require digital skills. 8 and 10, and that's a 4% increase since 2015. So if you have those skills, you have just some job security. Absolutely.
And Dr. Lockman, real quick before we move on, I'm always fascinated on this because I'm fascinated by old school giving way to new school. And I believe there has to be a shaking out of colleges that don't respond to this.
Oh, absolutely, because the colleges are going to find themselves irrelevant. I mean, and to give you a personal example, both of my kids are programmers now. They learned it from a site called Codecademy, which is free. So there was no expensive degree needed. They learned the skills, and now they've both got high-quality programming skills. They were doing freelance programming work when they were 14 and 15.
Wow.
One last question, I promise you this one, before we move on, for both of you. First, Dr. Lotkin. College was always a prestigious thing. In other words, it was a separation. Either you're a college grad or you're not. Has that also mitigated a bit? Dr.
Yes.
Lotkin first.
The younger generation, Gen Z, they look at college as, well, if I have to, I have to, but it's not a big deal. And most of the Gen Zers I talk to, they're looking at getting a 2-year degree at a community college, professional certifications, and moving on from there. The thought of spending so many, tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars at an Ivy League college makes them laugh. There's just no point to it anymore.
Mr. Reynolds.
I've got 2 kids that have taken an alternative path. They're taking some college, but they're really focusing on skill-based things, and they're making a good living in their 20s. And their skills are in demand. So I think
I like
that,
what you're saying about that. I like that, Keith. Maybe that is another way of the future, like a mix. You don't really maybe have the degree. You take some college classes, you get your certification, and then you present yourself as a marketable candidate. Any truth to that?
I think that's it. You can pick up financial analysis skills. You can pick up coding skills. You can literally go to Google and learn anything today and do just-in-time learning for your career. And face it, you're going to look at how many career changes people make today. It's much different than it was in the past. So reskilling is almost a job in of itself.
And
the
other problem that colleges are going to face is that when you're going to college, okay, you could, graduate with this fantastic degree, but the rate of change now is so quickly that 4 years after you graduate, that degree is useless.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking that when Keith was talking, I'm thinking, wait a second, as he's talking, I'm kind of thinking about what he's saying. Like you get a static degree, when Keith was talking and you were talking, Dr. Lotkin, about, constantly updating your skills, they're diametrically opposed, Dr. Lotkin, aren't they?
And at the same time, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you were keying on me. Go ahead, Dr. Lotkin.
I was just saying they really are. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and you can in turn go to the Google certification programs, get yourself skilled up in a matter of weeks. Each certification is several hours. And once you get some experience under your belt, you can very quickly be making $30 an hour and have a decent living wage. And in 5 years, there's going to be new platforms out there, and you can learn those and reskill yourself.
Do you know what would be interesting? We'll have to do this on one of our additions to the podcast. I'd like to really identify some colleges that do get it and others that are maybe relics of the past. That would be for another discussion. But I think there are, Dr. Lotkin, would you agree, colleges that get it will survive. Those that don't may not. And could there be a shifting of prestigious colleges that don't get it may be relegated to maybe not as prestigious? Dr. Lotkin, final thoughts before we go down the break?
Yeah, well, we've already seen some colleges fall from favor based on their programs. The fact of the matter is, going to college was always only as good as the degree you got, the knowledge you got, and the network it created. The Ivy League, basically, it was because they could connect you with all of their connections. But people are realizing that the education the Ivy League gives isn't necessarily any better than a public college.
Yeah, I would agree. And also I think that with, money being tighter, I think a lot of private universities really have to adjust more than even public schools. But after the break, let's talk about self-limiting beliefs.
Sounds good. We'll be right back.
Excellent.
To reach the next level, you need to operate at peak performance. The key to this is mastering the 7 elements of success. Learn how to master mindset, focus, operations, communications, innovation, evaluation metrics, and continuous improvement. Get the Biznetics Way at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookstores near you.
And we're back. And remember, if you want to be part of the conversation for this final live edition of Carnivore Radio, you can catch us at 563-999-3693. That's 563-999-3693.
Well, I thought that was a really interesting first segment. And as we get into our second area of discussion, I read a book a long time ago, not that long ago, about 6-7 years ago, by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and it was called Excuses Be Gone, or Excuse Be Gone. And I think it goes right into what we're talking about in terms of self-limiting beliefs. And I loved what he was saying. He's like, essentially, oh, it's too hard, I'm too old, I'm too young. And basically the whole thesis of his essay and his book was that, how do you know? And I've seen this with some of people I've come in contact with, that, oh, I'm too old to do this, I'm too that. And I think to myself, how do you know, Mr. Reynolds? I mean, how do you know? If you try and you fail, that's different. Then maybe you're right. But if you've never tried, I mean, it's kind of an excuse, and it's a way to prevent you from not getting out there and trying to succeed.
Yeah, well, one of the
or fail
one of the suppositions of the ability to retrain yourself and retrain your thinking using things like neuro-linguistic programming is that there's no failure, there's only feedback. And if you have a belief that you're a failure, or you're an idiot, or you're not as good as somebody, or you're going to be judged, if all those things are in your thought process, it's really hard to get out of your own way. And oftentimes things as easy as our last topic is getting a certification and getting yourself moving forward, they really require you to stop the negative thinking and start doing something proactive and positive for yourself.
I like that a lot, Keith. And before I throw out to Dr. Lopkin, I really like that, because I think for all of the positive things we have in society, belief systems that made America what it is today, I think we're too hung up, Dr. Lopkin, on failure. I like what Keith thinks. Because failure, sometimes some of the best things come out of failure. But I think too many people really curl up and figuratively die when they encounter a setback or a failure.
Yeah, the problem is a fear of failure. And what most people don't realize is that the most successful people in the world have failed much more often than they've succeeded. It's just that they've learned lessons from those failures, taken those lessons, moved on to the next project, and learned how to do better. There's an old quote, and I'm blanking on who it was, but it was try, fail, try again, fail better. And that's really how things need to be done. And in terms of people thinking, I'm too old, I can't do this. I talk about this with a lot of my coaching clients. If you are physically and mentally healthy, age is not a factor. Colonel Sanders was retired before he ever came up with the idea of Kentucky Fried Chicken. Richard Branson was in his 50s before he made sports.
Oh no, I think it's interesting. I'm fascinated that even in in terms of age, like I was saying, people I've friends, acquaintances, and I just listen to them, and they don't. Oh, I can never do this because I'm too old. Like I'm going. You never even tried? How do you know, Keith?
Yeah, you just took yourself out of the game.
Yeah, I know, and that's the thing is, and you know what I saw? This is years ago. I was staying up late one night. I think I might have been in grad school. I don't really remember, but I was watching this show, and it was an interview show, and they had the president of Notre Dame. He was a priest, and I still love this. He goes, I don't know what the subject was. It might have been exactly what we're talking about, but I love what he said. He goes, the crimes of omission are much worse than the crimes of failure. And I've seen that even in my own life. Like,
yep.
if I tried something and at least I gave it a good effort and I failed, I'm good with that. But the things that I think about are like, wow, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I try that? Keith?
Well,
Keith?
Yes. The thing about self-limiting beliefs is they're self-limiting. So the people who persevere and who don't let negative talk, that inner voice inside, override their curiosity and their goal setting and their continued effort to pursue their goals and dreams, are the people who lead the best lives. I think they really are self-actualizing. And
I like what you said, Keith,
not
to interrupt, but I think that's fascinating because I think that maybe is probably the best prescription for happiness, is having a couple setbacks, however many there are. That makes you appreciate things that much more. If you've never, like, in other words, I've been teaching Chinese philosophy in a class, one of my classes, and Taoism, yin and yang. And I always say, like, without warmth, you can't appreciate cold. Without darkness, you can't appreciate light. I think that's true with life, don't you, Keith? That if you've never had failure, how do you know? I mean, you might enjoy success, but you don't really have an appreciation for it.
Absolutely.
Dr. Lotkin?
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Keith.
That's very
Dr.
true.
Lotkin?
And, unfortunately, for a lot of limiting beliefs actually start at a very young age. Parents telling them, well, you have to do this to succeed. You have to do that. And if they can't do that, if they don't, they're not comfortable doing that, they feel, well, that's it. I cannot be a success. One of the most important things I was ever told when I was young was the father of a friend of mine told me point blank, he said, you are going to be a success because you're not afraid to fail.
I like that a lot. And go ahead.
That's really the key. It's like, you can't let failure bother you. Everybody fails. I mean, and when I talk about this with my coaching clients and in presentations, I use Apple as an example. Nobody would question the fact that Apple is a very successful company. But then there was the Newton, there was the Apple Cube. They've had so many failures. The same with Microsoft and Google. So just because you fail doesn't mean you cannot be a success.
No, I agree. I think one of my more fascinating observations, and we know you know both these people, Dr. Lotkin, so I certainly won't mention their names, but there's someone that we both know that, and they started this recruiting company or career company, whatever, and it eventually failed. This person we know went on, and now he has an investment company. He's doing great. The world's his oyster. The other person who was a super success before this, right? The company failed. He's never recovered. And I always found that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing that we could teach our students isn't knowledge-based. It's resiliency. It's about facing when things go wrong, coming back, and bouncing back even better.
Agreed, 100%. I think, and I also think it has to do with character. It's easy to be okay when things are great. It takes real perseverance and real courage, like you said, Doctor, to lift yourself up. Keith?
I'd like to add that it takes a self-awareness and the ability to focus on where is my attitude right now. Can I share something real quick?
Go ahead.
This was given to me by a boss about 20 years ago. He had it hanging in our office, and it's attitude. The longer I live, the more I realize the impact of attitude on life. Attitude to me is more important than facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, and then failures. It's more important than success. And it's more important than what other people think and say or do. It's more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, or a home. The most remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding our attitude. It's what we embrace for the day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing that we can do is play the one string we have, and that's attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% of what happens and 90% of how I react to it, and so it is with you. We are going to change. We are in charge of our attitude.
You know, Keith, I thank you for that. I agree, and I do agree, Dr. Lofgren, your comments on this, that life is like 10% what actually happens, and then 90% your reaction to it.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, your mindset is so important because not only does it depend on how you bounce back from things, having the proper mindset allows you to find the opportunities in the first place. If you have a negative mindset, you're walking around, everything's a problem, everything's an obstacle. But when you have a positive mindset, those obstacles are opportunities. It's, I can do this if I get past this and look at all the things I can accomplish. So it's a major difference, and it also affects other people around you. We all have somebody. We all have somebody.
No,
in
it's
our
amazing.
life that, every time you talk to them, it's like, things are terrible. Life is hard. It's like, how often do you really want to talk to those people?
That is, that's excellent, Dr. Lofgren, because that's exactly it. I think it's two things. The energy you send out, which is kind of metaphysical, but I believe it happens. And you're right. If you're positive, even if you're going through a bad time, you'll attract people that could eventually help you. Right, Dr.
Yes,
Lofgren?
Exactly.
Keith, what do you think of that? Go ahead, Dr. Lofgren.
Nobody accomplishes everything on their own. And if you're putting out a mindset that's causing people not to want to be around you, you're limiting your options right there.
Keith?
I think that we've all come through a tremendously difficult year, and we've all faced a lot of stress and strain. And there are people that I know that have, had to pivot. And the things that when I look at the people who are succeeding and coming out as we're opening up and the economy's opening up, it's the people who hunkered down this past year and got new skills, thought of a new business, thought how to pivot their business, and came through it. They're sitting in the catbird seat right now. And that's where we really have a responsibility to ourselves, is to manage that positive attitude that Eric is talking about.
Fantastic. Well, Eric, I think it's a great final live show we've just about to wrap up. And
it
Keith,
is.
Thanks so much for – go ahead.
We are just about out of time. So I want to remind our audience that we will still be around every week with Carnivore Bites. You can hear the replays of our live shows as well as the Carnivore Bites podcast at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.
Thanks a lot, Keith, for being our final live guest. You were great today, as always.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'll see you guys in a few weeks.
Take care.